case studies. Now, I think I'm going to run out of time tonight. I've prepared probably a longer presentation than I have time for, so I apologise if I skip things or miss things out. But nevertheless, we have two projects happening at the moment, one at South Bank, which I'd like to touch on briefly, and also some work we're doing with ULDA at Fitzgibbon. So depending on time, we'll talk about those as well. Just as a bit of preamble, I work in an area which we call integrated water management. So most of my comments have that background to them. And when I started as an engineer 30 years ago, you had your water department, your sewer department and your stormwater department, and really none of them interacted. The idea of integrated water management is the recognition that all of these things are part of the total water system, and that there are benefits in treating all of those different systems as part of an integrated whole. So that's the key plank, but underpinning all that is things like conserving water, making sure we make the best use of what we've got, using alternative sources, and that's where stormwater harvesting fits. The idea of water fit for purpose, not using drinking water for every use if you don't need drinking water quality for that use. And certainly toilets, laundry, garden watering fit well and truly into that category. And then there are issues of recycling and water sensitive urban stormwater design. I'm going to skip these, but just very briefly, to give a very, very brief overview and an indication that there is a lot happening around Australia with stormwater harvesting, a lot of interest in many different places. The federal government has made $200 million available as part of their National Water Initiative, whatever they call it, specifically for urban stormwater harvesting projects. Now, the Fitzgibbon and South Bank projects have received funding support, and some of these ones that I've got on the list here have also. The notable ones amongst this are projects like the Orange water supply augmentation, which probably a lot of people have heard about already, and similarly this one at Porters Creek, which I think is the sort of Gosford Wyong area, which are harvesting stormwater to replenish surface water storages. So they're sort of indirect reuse schemes. There's a lot of interest everywhere where there's appropriate aquifers in aquifer storage and recovery. So I understand that part of the current round of funding is a Sydney-based project between Blacktown and Penrith, but also notably South Australia have been very active in developing ASR projects. I've heard that Western Australia are starting to think more seriously about that, though let's face it, Perth is one giant aquifer storage and recovery system, so they've got not a lot to really develop. And there are other projects like this, I can never remember the proper name, is it Calcallo? Now what's interesting about Calcallo, which is in Victoria, is that they're proposing to take stormwater and treat it for direct reuse, straight back into the water supply system as drinking water. So that's probably the most ambitious of all of those schemes. I'm sure there are others, but the important thing really is just to recognise that a lot of people are setting their minds to the subject of stormwater harvesting because of the benefits they can see potentially occurring from it. So again, it's recognised within the water strategy. I mentioned that there are guidelines being developed at a national and at a local level, and I'll commend to you the Healthy Waterways Water by Design stormwater harvesting guidelines, if for no other reason that Bligh were the authors of those guidelines, so therefore we know that they're of a very high quality and worth looking at. And as part of that process through Water by Design, we've also been doing some training. So there are training programs for people that are interested to learn a bit more about what's involved in trying to develop stormwater harvesting. And then there's legislation which affects it, and it's important to be aware of those because, like everything, you can't move unless you follow the appropriate rules. And it's underpinned by, support from important organisations like Queensland Water Commission, but not limited to Queensland Water Commission. And as I mentioned, there's this federal funding. For those that aren't aware of it, SUPAC is the new Department of Environment. Sustainability, Environment, Water, Population and Climate. So you've learned something new tonight. as if JUHA wasn't a bad enough acronym, it's now SUPAC. I mentioned the grid. There's been a huge amount of change in water systems in southeast Queensland, underpinned by the grid, and I won't go through it, but the grid takes into account a number of different sources like the dams, the desalination plant, the purified recycled water schemes, and links it all together so that it can be managed as a total system, as a regional system. And then on top of that, there's been a huge reform within the industry. So we've now got a grid manager who runs this system at a high level. We've got a number of organisations set up to manage different parts of the system, and as everybody knows who have own a house and get water bills, we've got new retail entities which supply water to us. So very significant changes in the way that our water supply system operates. But I wanted to put this up just to illustrate one main point, and that is that when you look at this pie chart of the water sources that we rely on, the major single source is the Wivenhoe-Somerset Dam system, nearly half of our total water supply. When you add in other dams, Hinds, North Pine, etc., it takes it up to about 82%, and then you've got desalination, purified recycled water and groundwater. I've got rainwater tanks in there at 0, not because it is 0, but because I don't know what the number is, but they're also contributing to the overall system capacity. So I think that's given that we're not going to be building any new dams in southeast Queensland of any significance, I think that's a fairly telling slide. That graphic is from the water strategy, which shows growth in demand over time against system capacity. And really the point there simply is that our current demand is around about 340 gigalitres of water a year. Our system capacity with all the changes is about 540. And on these projections, that will need augmentation between 2022 and 2026, which is really no distance away at all. And at the moment, the major new sources that are projected to supplement this are primarily seawater desalination plants. You know, whether they're at Markoola or whatever it is up on the Sunshine Coast, or Port Lytton, or at Tugun, remains to be seen. But the main plan at the moment is more desalination plants. So depending on your point of view, you might see avoiding that as being something desirable. So one question is, how much can we harvest? And the difficult question is, if you want to harvest a significant amount of water, say 10%, what would we need to do? Now, I've never tried to do that before, so I've given myself a bit of a surprise, and it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is to it, but I'll put some numbers up. Just looking at some simplistic stuff to start off with. If you look at the precipitation on a suburban allotment, and I've ranged that from 300 to 800 square metres, turn that into runoff using some sort of runoff coefficient, and then have a look at typical household water demand, you can see that we actually get more rainfall on each of our own properties than we, or in fact more runoff than we use in water supply each year. So at a very simplistic level, it would seem that there is an excess of water for our needs. Slightly different equation if you look at medium and high density, because obviously you've got more people, more demand with lower roof area. So in this case, this little analysis shows that when you get above a certain size, then your demand exceeds your runoff. But even then, even for a relatively high density, you still have the potential to supply a reasonable proportion of your demand. As part of our stormwater harvesting guidelines, we got very smart and developed these wonderful generic yield curves to help people do first cut, seat of the pants, back of the envelope, whatever you call it, assessments of the potential yield from a stormwater harvesting scheme.